Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Wednesday, the 19th of February, which makes this the news for Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, day 1091 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. Hey, PH. I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, coming to you live from this major European capital that is under siege. Hey, Brian. Hey, Kay. Hey, Anthony. I see the peeps are coming in. It's nice to see everybody. Hey, Ho from Germany. Hey, Pugga Mahone. That looks like a problem to me. So, I don't think anybody says Yura except the Russians, right? That's a Russian thing. Nobody says that but Russians. Hey, Richard. The rest of us manage to pronounce the H and say hurrah. Well, thanks, Gary. I sure appreciate it. Hey, Leo Ring. Yeah, he'll have that effect on you. He will certainly have that effect on you. Did he have a Russian flag in his bio, Richard? Okay. I did the right thing there, I thought. JR All Up. Hello. You're a subscriber to this channel. Boy, I don't recognize that name. I'm sorry. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Evening, super user. How you doing, pal? Hey, Daryl Roberts. Hey, Fitz. There's the sponsor of tonight's live, everybody. Fitz. Dark Irish, wish him well. Thank him for his... Fitz is a big supporter of this channel. I'll tell you, Fitz, Ballerina, Bobby, Dan Ballard, Arn, of course, James Boudreau, and many others. I apologize for everybody's name who I didn't mention just now. Weibo has been a great supporter of this channel, and I really appreciate it. For those of you who are Patreon supporters, a number of videos were posted on Patreon today that I strongly, or not strongly encourage, I don't want to say that, but that I would ask you to take the time to watch and respond to. Take a look at what, because the world is different today, right? We're not living in a world where we can count on the United States to do anything like the right thing. On the contrary, we are living in a world where the federal system of the U.S. government has been subverted by adversarial foreign powers. Putin's greatest victory was the re-election of Donald Trump, and he worked very hard and spent a lot of money to make it happen, and he expects a payoff. Hey, Steve with a V. Hey, Renee Herman. So it's very disconcerting to me. We are at a critical inflection point in history, and the entire alignment of powers in the world has just shifted in a way that I never imagined they could. Hey, Bernard. And so we need to think, well, Michael, you better wait and see what happens with this war, pal. As far as Mexico goes, you got to be careful. Hey, Van. As far as Mexico goes, you got to be careful about living there as an American. You can't have a bank account at all. It's illegal, right? You can stay 180 days. You can go out of the country and then come right back for another 180. But you cannot have a bank account. And that makes life hard. So you got to get citizenship, and that's a process. Ukraine doesn't have the same restrictions. I have a Ukrainian bank account here. So just a thought, something to think about, Michael. China likes Europe. Well, China likes everybody. John, not at this time, right? Like, let's just be honest about it. The single women in Ukraine left the country. They're in Germany and Poland, and this is not you don't come here to date. You better come here. If you're coming here now, you better come here with a plan to be useful to the people of Ukraine. And you better be prepared to, be badly injured or even die, because it's a war zone. That's a real thing. Veronica, I don't have any idea what you're talking about there with Trump and Ukraine and such. Hey, Bjorn. Yeah, I don't think China is any kind of an ally that anybody wants. No, Van, you did not. You saw me with my 3 colleagues with whom I have had a great working relationship with for the last year. They are 3 of the smartest, funniest women I have ever known. And it's a real pleasure and privilege to be able to work with them. Make no mistake. Yeah, I know. What you should be doing is busting my ass that I can't get with any of them. Like, that's not even like on the table. Veronica, forcing Ukraine to pay for everything that USA has helped. It's not going to happen. It's a ridiculous gangster style extortion. Hey, you got a real nice country there. Be a shame if something happened to it. Nice rare earth minerals. You ought to let us take care of them, baby. Don't you worry about what happens to them. It's a nightmare, and Zelensky has refused the deal. So that is not going to happen. I've talked to so many Americans who are outraged at the idea that we provided aid to Ukraine, and now Trump is trying to squeeze Ukraine to get paid for it, when the terms and conditions were clear when we sent it to Ukraine. And not only is he trying to get paid for what we gave them, he's trying to get them to pay for the replacements that we had to order for ourselves. That is nonsense of the first order. It's ridiculous. It's obscene. Correct, Veronica. That is correct. You know, Fitz, that's the thing about these dictators, right? That's the thing about Putin. The difference between you and me and them is that we have enough. We have enough. You know, for most of my life, I did okay. I'm living on $1,300 a month right now, and I feel like I'm doing just fine. Like I have enough. It would be nice to have a little more. I'm not saying it wouldn't be. But I can manage right now with the support of the Patreon folks. And again, if you're a Patreon subscriber and you haven't been on Patreon today, I really encourage you to take a listen to my address to the Patreon folks. No, Thomas, that is not correct. Thomas Cochran here says the U.S. done the same with UK in World War II with Lend-Lease. It's not true. The U.S. in World War II gave the British all kinds of weapons and charged them for the cost of the weapons. So of the $183 billion that we have spent on Ukraine, only 86.3 of it, 86.3 billion, was sent to Ukraine. The vast majority of that in weapons. A reasonable lend-lease program would forget about everything that was given and would say, hey, at the current market value, your neodymium deposits are worth maybe $500 million. So what do you say You mine the neodymium, give it to us, and we'll give you a $500 billion credit toward weapons. 500 billion in neodymium, 500 billion in weapons. That's a fair trade agreement at the current market price. You might even say to the Ukrainians, hey, we did help you out with that first 183 billion. Maybe you could give us a 20% discount off the market rate. That's not extortion, right? That's a decent deal for everybody. But no, Trump's deal essentially put control of all of Ukraine's extraction economy, both its rare earth minerals and its fossil fuels, under the control of the United States. The Daily Telegraph called it economic servitude for Ukraine for the rest of its existence, for the foreseeable future. Dom, if you want to know how I feel about the USA, I would encourage you to listen to a video that I posted tonight. It's the most recent post on my page. I love the United States. I love the United States more than anything else in the world. And I am deeply troubled by the fact that it is in the hands, that its federal system of government has been subverted by a foreign adversary. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin's greatest achievement. That's a real thing. Trump's art of the bad deal. Trump's deal is extortion, Michael. I could not agree more. Cervesayaso says, plus those weapons were expiring and would have costed us more to keep. For many of them, you are not wrong. Those ATACMs that were so important to the Ukrainians, some of the casings on those are dated 1986, 87, 88. Ronnie Reagan paid for them. So, Mel, how do we get rid of Trump? That's the problem. That is the problem. He's leading the United States into a constitutional crisis right now, and I don't know how they're going to deal with it. Thomas Cochrane goes on to point out that the big difference between World War II Lend-Lease and Trump's extortion of Ukraine is that the UK just paid off their Lend-Lease recently because the interest on it was so low and the payments were so small compared to what they bought that they only just got it paid off recently. The Soviet Union, by the way, never paid its back. 50% of the Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union was written off by the United States. That's what worries me, Nightshade, is that the United States does seem to be allied far more closely with our greatest adversary of all time than with our allies. Why does nobody stand up against Trump? I wish I knew. Because I wouldn't piss on that piece of shit if he was on fire. I cannot understand the cultish nature of the strong man. I don't get it. So I can't answer that question, Don. Yeah, I don't know if your numbers are right, Michael, but your point is well made, that we have lots of shit we could get rid of in Ukraine. I think the Trump takeover of the United States is more closely resembles Orban's. Orban and Trump were both democratically elected into an established democracy, and then working from within the executive branch, seized more power and undermined the institutions of those democracies in order to keep themselves in power. I would say Putin's rise to power is more closely aligned with that of the Soviet leaders before him, while both Orban and Trump depend on the subversion of long established democracies. How can Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan have any faith in the U.S. now? I mean, you're not wrong to ask that question, but the fact that you asked it that way says everything I need to know about you. Gaining back the trust of our allies is going to be a real concern for Americans moving forward. Yeah. Betty, don't get angry, right? Like, don't put that pressure on your heart. I know it hurts, and I know that we have reason to be angry. But now is not the time for mindless anger. Now is the time to do something for you. In an age of ignorance, go out and learn something. Fight disinformation by educating yourself. In a time of theft and extortion and gangsterism, choose to deal with everybody in your life honestly. And in this age where hatred and division is the order of the day, choose compassion and love in all you do. That's how we'll win. Hate always burns itself out and destroys itself. You see the rats in Russia eating each other as the ship is sinking. You see Trump throw every loyalist and loyal supporter under the bus as soon as it serves him to be done with them. Their systems, the way they think about the world and their fellow man, are doomed to failure by their inherent nature because they consume each other. Could the U.S. military stop him? Mel, what that will take is for the commander-in-chief to issue an illegal order, as I understand it. The military is not bound to execute any order of the president. They are bound to execute all lawful orders. So should Trump prepare an invasion of Canada, for example, or Mexico, or Denmark, I do not believe the United States military would execute that order. I don't believe so. And then what happens next? You're in a constitutional crisis where the commander-in-chief has been ignored. And what happens next? It's anybody's guess. And you're not wrong to resent the United States. I'm not going to say that. I have a lot of resentments myself about what's happened to my country. But what we have to remember, I think, is that the average person is dumb. And half of the people are dumber than average. The whole idea that America has been suckered by Russian disinformation is a real thing. And we should feel sorry for those people. It's hard to when they're total pieces of shit. But that would be a better way to go. Okay, even if you were to somehow get rid of Trump, wouldn't that just put Vance in? It would. And Vance is an absolutely unqualified, to say the least. When I think about the idiocy that came out of his mouth at the Munich Security Conference this past weekend, right, where he got up there and instead of talking about security, instead of talking about Ukraine, he brought his culture war nonsense to the Europeans and blamed them for all that's wrong in Europe, quoting Russian propaganda right and left, and then going and meeting with literal Nazis, with the AFD. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. Gerwin 1976 has a really great question here. Mel, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to your question. Mel asks, the UK and France put Europe and Ukraine under their nuclear umbrella? One would assume so, at the very least, but I have not seen any official confirmation of that. So I'm not sure what the answer to your question is. But for Gerwin, can you explain Ukraine got rid of nukes for protection from the USA? So after the fall of the USSR, the United States was worried about what they called loose nukes. Nukes that some Russian general sold under the table to some terrorist organization to line his own pocket. Loose nukes, right? And so what they wanted to do was consolidate the nuclear arsenals that had been distributed across the Soviet states. They wanted to consolidate them all back in Russia under a single plan, much of which is financed by the United States, by the way, that would keep them secure. And we would know where they were and what was happening with them, and it wouldn't be a problem. And so we have the Budapest Memoranda. And you can find the text of the Budapest Memoranda online, and I would encourage you to read it. It's not long. It's really surprisingly short. And I would challenge you to read that document and then quote to me where it says that the United States will go to war for Ukraine if they're invaded. It doesn't say any such thing. The only guarantees that it gives is for humanitarian and economic aid from the United States. The fact that the United States has gone to the mat, financed, roughly 177 billion, somewhere between 177 and 183 billion in support for Ukraine at this time, is not because there is an agreement that says we have to, but rather, I think we do it because there is an inherent acknowledgement of our own self-interest in the further spread of stable democracies opposed to the Russian gangsterism. I'm more confident than ever that Europe will have Ukraine's back. So, Steve, after America sidelined Europe on the Ukraine negotiations in Saudi Arabia, and sidelined Ukraine, mind you, members of the European Commission met in Paris for an emergency discussion about what to do with Ukraine. Unfortunately, just as Putin predicted, and he counts on, the divisiveness of the European Council was such that they could not come to an agreement on boots on the ground in Ukraine. However, several member nations did state clearly they are prepared to put boots on the ground in Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping mission. UK, France, and Sweden all said so. But that's not the important part. The important part is that according to Annalena Baerbock, the commission determined that it would provide Ukraine with unprecedented funding to the tune of $700 billion. Literally more than 7 times what we have delivered to Ukraine as the United States. With that kind of support, the United States can fuck right off. Nobody needs them. Their power here has just expired. And it is a shame and a sin to see the United States abnegate its responsibilities and leadership position in the world for the money-grubbing bullshit of this copper-tone con man. So no, Steve, it's good news today. Mr. Trump is like Mr. Marmite. You like him, you don't. No, that's bullshit. That's bullshit of the first order. It's not a question of liking or not liking Donald Trump. I don't give a fuck about Donald Trump. What I care about is the fact that the constitutional judicial checks on the executive power he's ignoring. What I don't like is that he's intimidating and threatening the courts to do his bidding or else. That he stands there and says, I can break any law I want. I'm the president. Fuck you. The whole point of being an American is that the law applies equally to all. That we are all created equal and entitled to equal representation under the law, and I don't give a fuck who your daddy was. So no, Mr. Marmite, it is not the same. And I liked you yesterday when I saw your name for the first time. Now I dislike you intensely for making this false comparison. Bobby, that is the big question. How do we defeat mafiosism in our government? I don't have an answer to that question. I don't. Certainly, more violence is not the answer. But then again, it may be. And I can't champion that. I can only watch it unfold. JR all up. I couldn't agree more. It is very embarrassing being an American right now. Glinda the Good Witch, you have no power here. David Keller, I'm sorry, repeat what? $700 billion, Mel, correct. So now, again, I want to, okay, so people seem to be, want clarification on this. According to Annalena Baerbock, speaking after the emergency EU Council session in Paris yesterday, according to her, they are working on an unprecedented level of support for Ukraine to the tune of $700 billion in both cash humanitarian aid to make sure people are fed and have clean drinking water and the government can run, and weapons packages to make sure that Ukraine can defend itself. And it's clearly in Europe's best interest to do just that. There are some folks in Europe who liked Zelensky's suggestion of the creation of a European army, which to date has not existed, right? But wouldn't it be great if every country in Europe, instead of having to field its own army, could field those pieces of a military that it does best? So all the Scandinavian countries and the British handle the European Navy, while ground troops come from Ukraine and Germany and Poland and interior countries. The pilots come from the places with the best pilots and the best planes. That all makes sense to me. And we could see Europe moving in that direction in the face of the threat posed to it by the U.S.-Putin alliance. Do you think Trump will do a Putin and change the Constitution to stay in power? Yes. They're already working on it. The good news is that it's much harder to do that in the United States than it was in the Russian Federation. But absolutely, Trump is going to shred the Constitution. Make no mistake. Oh, pardon me. Brodog, you might be right, that the tipping point with the U.S. military is when Trump declares martial law against the growing protest. That could be the tipping point. We don't have to get Trump on tax evasion. We already got him for 34 felony counts of fraud. Enough. We've got him. He should be in fucking jail. And the greatest failure of the Biden administration was that they had 4 years to do it and they couldn't make it happen. Weak. Thomas, you are right. Right there is the crux of the American political dilemma. Our system is a two-party system. John Adams warned about this, that it was the worst kind of system, that you need multi-party politics in a democracy. And I couldn't agree more. It's a real problem. There is martial law after midnight here, which is why I do the live at midnight. It's 5 o'clock in New York, right? It guarantees that I'm always home by this time. And it guarantees that I'm always home by this time. And, I mean, I don't know. It seemed like a good idea when I scheduled it at this time. Right. The Dutch do have an excellent Air Force, right? You guys ponied up a bunch of F-16s, and you got a bunch of F-35s. Is that true, Frank? Is that, because I don't know, is the population of the European Union 450 million? Or maybe not the European Union, all of Europe? Yeah, no, I agree with Lars, my buddy Lars there. There are no NATO troops fighting in Ukraine. This is nonsense. This is a lie. To believe that lie means that you are either a useful idiot who has been seduced by Russian propaganda, or you are an instrument of the very evil that we are all here fighting. Hey, Flip, how you doing? Ukraine is building some of the best tech that we know. Things are looking a lot better in Pokrovsk. A lot better. The Russians just advanced to the southwest around Kharkov, though the Ukrainians did recapture some positions in the southwest as well. And there are some indications that the wind might be changing there. You're not wrong about that. So I'm cautiously optimistic on Pokrovsk and on the whole front line, frankly. Hey, Big D. Comedy night was great. Thank Fitz. He's our sponsor tonight. Comedy night was great. I posted a couple videos showing off the place. The team said hello from Laughter is the Best Medicine. And I published a video of a speech that I gave for storytelling night. And I'd really love feedback on that story. It is important to listen to the end. But I would love feedback on that story for anybody who has 7.5 minutes to give it a listen. I saw a military conference they had yesterday, and well, let's just say they're cooking. Okay, I don't know what that means. The head of the post office just resigned. Is what's his name? DeJoy out? That would be great news. Unless, of course, Trump is going to give him a cabinet position now. Tennessee military service people refused to obey Donald Trump yesterday, stood with President's Day protesters. Felice Brown, is that true? That's very interesting to me. In Canada, more than two parties splits the vote with two parties close. Cool. Yeah, you know, the problem with the first try at something is that it's usually the worst version, right? All the other versions that come after are better versions. And the reality is that 1776, the start of our democracy, it was the first modern democracy in the world. It gets exported back to the Europeans, who then adopt it. So our version is the worst one out there. The two-party system is the worst. Love those SAS guys. Trump's people want to word a third-term election that would exclude Obama from running? Yeah, I mean, that's not unlikely, right? I mean, that's the problem with these people. They have no sense of fairness. They want to rig the game for themselves and not give fair play to anybody else. That is the fundamental problem. Bobby, you're not wrong. Another constitutional convention might be in order. Brodog, the comedy is in English. Marilyn Fuller is confirming the story that Felice told us, said they laid down their shields and stood with the protesters. I'll have to take a look. Michael, thank you. Encourage your fellow Patreon subscribers to please check out those videos from today. I really appreciate it. And give feedback. B-52s in Ukraine now? That doesn't sound right at all, Thomas. That doesn't sound right at all. I mean, unless you mean Tu-22s, the backfire bombers, because we are under an air alert right now. But not B-52s. Neil, as I understand it, Keir Starmer does not want to send the British Army into Ukraine, as I understand it. As I understand the current position of the British government on boots on the ground here, it would be as part of a post-ceasefire peacekeeping mission. The French, the British, the Swedes are all willing to send peacekeepers to Ukraine after the ceasefire, as I understand it. I mean, in the United States, one would expect the National Guard to stand with the people because there's no difference between them. I mean, the National Guard are the people, and the people make up the National Guard. It's ridiculous. They're your brothers, your cousins, your sisters, your mothers, right? Your family out there, your neighbors, your friends, your relatives. Come on. Oh, B-52s are currently in Fairford, UK. Oh, well, that I believe. Thomas, I wouldn't worry about civil war in the United States. Good morning, Western Australia. Well, Brian, I hope that that's the last one I posted, that video about the great love of my life. Hey, there's Blue Ariel Silk and Big Hawk. How you guys doing? Today, Russia just said EU troops for a ceasefire is an escalation. Yeah, that's the other part of this whole bullshit discussion, Vanland. Russia's never going to agree to British and French troops next door to it. Give me a fucking break. That's never going to happen. Get the fuck out of here. Russia's never going to agree to that. Never. That's just a joke. Now, what was very interesting to me, Bobby, the short answer to your question is yes. It is illegal what Trump is doing with the troops. Yes, it is. And those troops would have every right to disobey those orders, in my opinion. I'm not a military lawyer, right? But in my opinion, I believe that that's true. Y'all let me know when y'all see him get close to the front line. I don't know what you're talking about. What is your country, MN? I'm curious to know. Michael is just, you just want to see the Kremlin burn, don't you, pal? Come on, trust the Ukrainians to pick the right targets, would you? Trust the Ukrainians to pick the right targets. They're doing a hell of a job. So much of what Trump is doing is illegal. You are right. Russia has never forgiven the UK for the Crimea War defeat. Into the Valley of Death rode the 600. Charge of the Light Brigade. I memorized it in 10th grade. I couldn't do it now. I don't think so. Guns to the left of me, guns to the right of me. Blah, 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 blah. Great bit of poetry. And Michael, you're not wrong. I get it, pal. I get it. I totally understand your enthusiasm for such a thing. The question is that enough to make a real change in Russia's ability to prosecute this war? Yeah, and with good reason, Bobby, right? Zelensky said point blank that he would not participate in the discussions of the negotiations in Saudi Arabia, even if he was asked. The fact that he wasn't asked is insult enough. It's reason enough to ignore everything that comes out of there. And it burns my ass that the negotiations took 3 hours. There's no way you're settling the Ukraine matter in 3 hours unless you're taking dictation. And that's exactly what Marco Rubio was doing as lapdog to Lavrov. Give me a fucking break. Disgusting. Oblivion, I think you're right. I think Russian propaganda did put Trump in power. Someone explain how Ukraine can hold a front line so big with no war experience? What do you mean no war experience? What the fuck are you talking about? Ukraine was a member of the Soviet Union. Between World War II and the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, the Soviet Union was involved in at least, just off the top of my head, at least 15 conflict zones around the world, and many of the people in those conflicts were Ukrainian Soviets. So what the fuck are you talking about, Scotty? You're starting to piss me off. Right, Jax? I'm with you. Ukraine was in Iraq and Afghanistan, exactly. Okay, MN just told the Russian lie that gets him booted permanently. Goodbye, MN. This is not a proxy war started by the U.S. Give me a break. Well, Dan, if there's nothing to hear here, you won't mind me blocking you so that you never have to not hear it again. I read that U.S. Treasury Secretary wanted Ukraine to sign mineral giveaway in an hour ultimatum. He did. They didn't. Good move. Bobby, the terms of that deal were terrible. There's a video on it on Patreon on the news that we are waking up to from today. Truth Hurts says, I think Ukrainian soldiers are the best in Europe. I think that they are certainly the most experienced in Europe right now. In the actual execution of a long front line. Nobody has the experience that Ukraine has. Yeah, I love Ben Hodges. Are you saying that to kiss my ass now after saying all these stupid things? Like, where did that come from? Big Hawk makes a good point. Ukraine was also the brains behind their nuclear programs, missile programs, and military science. The aircraft carriers, the big ships, the frigates were designed here. The Antonov line of planes were designed here. The nuclear reactors that powered the Soviet Union were designed here. The UN, the problem with the UN is that Russia stole the Soviet permanent seat on the council. That's the problem. You know, the UN Charter says that the UN Security Council has 5 permanent members, each of which has a veto power. The problem is that 2 of those members are autocratic nightmares, where the wealth inequality between the 500 richest people and everybody else is so big that literally in the case of Russia, fewer than 500 people own 99.98% of all of Russia's wealth. If you think wealth inequality in the US is bad, take a look at Russia. Titus asks, do you think Russia genuinely feels Ukraine joining NATO is a national security threat to them? In my opinion, we know that Russia's not worried about NATO in any way, shape, or form, because when Finland and Sweden joined NATO, adding like 1,200 kilometers, like 800 miles, to the NATO-Russia border, Russia responded by demilitarizing the border. They pulled all the air defense systems that were along the Finnish border down into Ukraine where they could be more useful. And they populated the guard towers with women who had never been allowed in the armed forces before. So Russia knows that NATO is not a threat to it. I'm with Weibo. Ukraine has the most experienced troops in the world. The U.S. is the best fighting force in the world. It's certainly one of them. Take a look at North Korea. Why? I don't need to see people eating grass to avoid starvation. Russia can't build new missiles without Ukraine help. Yeah, Bobby, there's something like that is true. You're not wrong about that. Ukraine should be training NATO troops. That's going to happen eventually. Ukrainian warriors deserve their place on the correct side of history. Ukrainian warriors, by definition, are on the correct side of history. The question is, will that side of history win? If Russia doesn't want... Right, lopsided. You hit it on the head. Right there, pal. Look at Lopsided's question. If Russia doesn't want to border NATO, why take Ukraine? Because nothing that they say is true. It has nothing to do with NATO, has nothing to do with NATO expansion, has nothing to do with a fear of NATO. That's all bullshit. Ukraine is producing more tea. Okay, I don't know what that means. Lars makes a good point. Russian leaders need outside threat to keep internal control, so internal propaganda. The French Foreign Legion are the best soldiers in the world. They are right up there, pal, right? If Ukraine takes Crimea back, they may build Air Force destroyers. Maybe. I think there's a real question about aircraft carriers these days. How effective are they? Are they just big-ass targets out at sea that drones can hit at will? I think that is a concern that the world is having. And I think we'll get a better pulse, a feel for the pulse on that if we watch India. Because India is currently in the business of building 2, not 1, but 2 carrier strike groups. And I mean, there's lots of countries in NATO that don't even have one carrier strike group, or even one carrier for that matter. So the idea that India is building two of them should make everybody stand up and take notice. How that shakes out for the Indians is likely to be how it'll shake out for the rest of the world in that kind of socioeconomic sphere. And we'll see how relevant that equipment stays over the next generation or so. Hey, Maddie, right? Actually, Ukraine is better than U.S. because they have been in the fight for 3 years. Ukraine's been in this fight for 11 years, right? Everybody seems to forget about the Donbass War, the Little Green Men, the invasion of Crimea. Oh, yeah, Hegseth and Marco Rubio trying to negotiate with Lavrov was enough to make a cat laugh, Judy. Am I right? I mean, drones are easy to take out from the advanced stance. Yeah, Pete, I mean, I'm not a military guy, but I don't think that's right. Do you think Tucker Carlson get a job in Trump's government? No idea. Would not surprise me. Would not surprise me. The UK has 2, France 1, and building 2. You're talking about airplane carriers, aircraft carriers. The UK saw the worth of aircraft carriers in the Falklands War with our little Harriers. Yep. Well, I mean, I'm not sure that that's a great comparison, right? Because in the Falklands War, what you had was a kind of battle of distance throw. I forget what the numbers are, but let's just say that the British carriers, they could fire artillery that went 25 kilometers. The Argentinians only had stuff that would fire 10 kilometers. So all you had to do was keep your ships 15 kilometers away from the enemy, and you could still pound the shit out of their positions. So I'm not entirely sure that that's the best analogy. Could always use aircraft carriers for massive drone launching platforms. It's a fair point, Ron. You're not wrong about that. Frank Einstein may be ambassador to Hungary. I don't know what that's about. How are the Russians funding their war machine? Surely even the oligarchs are up against the buffers. They are. They are. And it's getting worse every day. Is it true that drones are the primary weapons on the front instead of Ukrainians? Hope so. So, Maddie, my understanding is that 60%, 6 out of 10 casualties on the front line on the Russian side are caused by Ukrainian drones. 6 out of 10. Making them the primary weapon on the front line, yes. Okay. So I'm all caught up there in the chat with everything. Oh, and it's 1 o'clock here. Okay, great. So, guys, we're out of time. I actually didn't even do the news. I had a few things to talk about, but That's okay. That can wait until tomorrow. And again, I want to thank Fitz, who is the sponsor of tonight's live. I have no other sponsors for the month of February. If you'd like to sponsor a live, the PayPal is in the description. I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight, particularly Fitz for his sponsorship of the live. I want to thank all the Patreon folks and Lars, who has the Discord server, as well as Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces. So thank you all so much. Please take a look at the posts on Patreon today, guys. They're important, and they identify a fundamental shift in the focus of this channel. You know, we're living in a world now where Trump is causing all kinds of craziness and havoc. And that calls for a certain amount of flexibility. And so the channel should evolve to meet the challenges of the day. And that's the bottom line. I'm with you, Jocko. Totally with you, man. It's a crime and a shame. No doubt about it. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for hanging out for the hour. I appreciate it. Take care.